Hopefully you've started to get bored from the break, because that means you need to go back to your chair and we will start our final class. Okay, before we get started, I want to share with you a story about a remarkable woman. I just learned about her about a week ago. Her name, I feel very bad for her. Her name was Borghild Dahl? I don't know. I have no idea, but whatever. She lived in the 19th century. She was born, I think, in the late 1800s. But when she came into this world, she was profoundly blind. Not completely, but profoundly. Okay? So, she had no vision in her right eye. She had only about 5-10% vision in her left eye, thanks to one little opening on the side of her eye. Now, I want you to really understand this woman's life. So, everyone take your finger, okay? And with your finger, I want you to touch your left eyelashes, okay? Can you feel them? Yeah. Okay. So, this is how close her books had to be to her eye in order to read them. Okay? Okay, you can take your hand down now. Let's get a little uncomfortable. Somebody poke their eyes in a second. Okay. So, think about this. This woman had that much vision. She had to read with books that close to her eye. She finished 2 college degrees. Wow. With that ability, or that degree of vision. Okay, she went on to become a supervisor of teachers. She facilitated trained teachers in a school system, I think in Indianapolis or someplace like that. Now, here's what was really cool. In 1950 or 1948, she was 52 years old. Okay, and they did a procedure on her eyes. And on her left eye, she increased her vision by 40%. Okay? So think about that. 50 years of her life, she only had that much vision. And then suddenly this procedure, and she had 40% of her vision back. Now this woman, she was a woman of faith. She actually wrote a few books. And her books are just filled with her appreciation and gratitude to God. Both before and after the surgery. Okay? She wrote some books before and she wrote some afterwards. Now, I show you this picture because one of the things that she shared in one of her books was when she got her vision back, she noticed the joy of washing dishes. And how, as she washed dishes, even taking her hand and getting a scoop of bubbles, and then being able to look at the wonder of bubbles. Wow. Can you believe that? I mean, stories like that, I need in my life. Especially when my daughter says, "Dad, it's your turn to do the dishes." I gotta get that perspective, right? Because if we don't, right, I'll take simple things and just kind of, whatever. But I just think examples like that are so helpful to us to be very, very, obviously grateful for abundant blessings that God has given us. Okay. Okay, so this is the final, and I would say probably the most, I don't know, this is a big deal for me. Shame is a very big thing in my life. This is session 4. Oh. Sorry. That's being announced in the audio. Okay, here we go. So, now first of all, give me a little cultural education. What is England's understanding or ideas about shame? What is it? What is that? It's got that? Oh, well, that's a whole other problem, by the way. And I'll do that class next year. Okay, yes. So you could think about it as a country, feeling responsible for some really horrible decisions that were made at some point, right? Anything else closer to home?
I think it's not to be talked about, so it's concealed.
You are absolutely correct. Okay, and that is actually why right now it's very difficult to talk about it. Because this is how shame works, and we're going to look at some rules here in just a second. But here's the thing. I believe that Jesus, in his ministry, he had this ability to create a shame-free zone around him, which is why people that were called sinners were able to approach and be with him. Very different zone when you're around the Pharisees, right? Pharisees, don't you realize who you are? Jesus, don't you get that you're hanging out with those people, right? But yet people that really understood Jesus, for some reason, shame should have said, go away, right? He's good, you're bad. But somehow Jesus broke all those rules, and people that generally would have been gone away from someone that was good actually are going toward Jesus, and they felt it was okay. Why was that? Well, let's figure this out. First of all, this is an amazing definition. The intensely painful feeling or experience of believing we are flawed and therefore unworthy of acceptance and belonging. Now, for some of us, right, we don't believe we are flawed. I know I am flawed, okay? How many would agree with that? As Christians, that is something we hope we figured out. That I get it. There's something wrong with me, right? It's called my sinful nature. It's wrong, and it never is helpful. It never wants to do the best thing for me or for others. So, okay, we get it. But this is where shame gets really, really dangerous. Taking that feeling that's very, very painful and then believing that you're unworthy of acceptance and belonging. And by the way, shame can happen in a crowded room. You can be in a room with 100 people and still have this painful feeling of not feeling acceptance or not feeling belonging. Okay? Now, this woman right here, Brene Brown, she is a very popular woman right now in the United States. She is a professor of sociology at the University of Houston. She has spent, I believe, the last 12 years basically studying shame. Now, who signed up for that? I mean, that's crazy. But she did, and she has stumbled upon just some of the most profound insights, I believe, about human nature. And what I'm finding very helpful about it is that, churches, it's interesting. Jesus created shame-free zones. Churches don't do as good of a job as Jesus did. In fact, if you ask a lot of people, why don't you go to church? In their answer is some answer connected to shame. I fear that if I go to church, they are going to shame me. I'm going to feel bad about myself. And yet that's not the environment that Jesus created around himself. So, in other words, we have to understand this if we are going to be a church of Christ followers that has the same impact that he did, where people are around you and they don't feel shame. But you can't give to others what you haven't received from God. So this is where we have to deal with our own shame first. Okay? So, today we're going to be talking about shame resilience, which is the ability to recognize shame in thoughts or in actions and learning to not be overcome by it. Shame resilience is the ability to recognize shame and not be overcome by it. So based on that definition that we read earlier, the answer to shame is connection. The exact opposite of shame is connection. And why did Jesus come to this world? to connect you with God. That's it. And then as we got connected to God, what do? We help others get connected to God. It's very simple. I mean, Jesus was the antidote for shame, as are we for this world. Okay, which one feels better?
Neither.
Do I have to choose, Dave? Really? Okay, but see, here's the problem. And this is what's very manipulative about shame, is that this is what we think. We think that shame and guilt are kind of just this same thing. In fact, people will put those two words together. Yeah, man, that person just made me feel all kinds of guilt and shame. Guilt and shame, guilt and shame, shame and guilt, shame and guilt. And we mix those words up so much that we have no idea how radically different these two concepts are. Because they are radically different. Okay? Let me share a little bit of research with you. Shame is highly, highly correlated with the following issues in our society: addiction, depression, bullying, eating disorders, violence, aggression. In other words, when you look at these issues and you interview people engaged with these issues, you notice that they have a very, very high level of shame thinking. The thing we just read about, right? They sort of have this painful feeling or experience of feeling unworthy of acceptance or belonging. And when you feel unworthy of acceptance or belonging, you will kind of break out into some of these issues. You'll either kind of shut down and get depressed, or you'll kind of blow up and impact other people, because misery likes company. So if I don't feel worthy of acceptance, I don't want you to feel worthy of acceptance. This is how toxic it is. But look at this. Guilt is inversely correlated with the same exact issues. Inversely correlated. What does that mean? That means that people that tend to have higher feelings of guilt have less issues dealing with these, or are less affected by these issues. Isn't that interesting? So in other words, let me give you kind of a crude example. So Friday night I go out and I get drunk. Saturday morning I wake up and I can have two different thoughts. I got drunk last night. That was wrong. That was really foolish. I should not have done that. What's the chances of that person changing? Pretty high, right? Okay, same scenario. Wake up Saturday. I got drunk last night. I am a pathetic person. What do you think? Am I going to change?
No.
Well, come on. I'm a horrible person. Horrible people don't change. Horrible people don't figure things out. Pathetic people don't grow, right? So you see the difference, right?
Yeah.
Guilt is a God-given blessing. It actually helps us. Shame is a curse. Shame is a curse. So we're going to take a story that you all know, I hope, pretty well in the Bible, but we're going to look at it through the lens of shame and guilt. Okay? Have you ever seen this painting before? This is a very, very famous painting by Rembrandt. It's called The Return of the Prodigal Son. My wife and I, the very last thing that we did when we left Russia is we took a quick trip to St. Petersburg, and unfortunately I only had 10 minutes in the Hermitage, but in those 10 minutes I fulfilled a promise that my mother gave me, which is, David, I want you to see this painting before you leave Russia. And there's a wonderful book written by Henry Nguyen, Nguyen. He's a Catholic theologian. He wrote an entire book on this painting. And it is phenomenal. It is a great book. I highly recommend it. But this painting is remarkable. Very, very telling. But if you can see, right, this is the prodigal son. There's the dad. Anybody want to guess who this is? Brother. You see what he's doing? Looking down. Not very happy. This painting is just, it's powerful. It's very, very powerful. But in this painting, well, we're going to go through the story here, but we're going to see the whole story of shame and guilt play out in this story. So look at this. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Okay. So what do you think, so far in this story, what do you see? You see shame or guilt? What's the opposite of shame? Connection, right? What is the son doing?
Disconnected.
The son is disconnecting. Now, in Jewish culture, asking your father for your inheritance before he's dead was like saying, drop dead. This relationship is over. It's done. Now, by the way, we all know the story, right? And we know that this father deeply loved his son, right? But think about that. When you disconnect from someone that loves you, that's shame. When you move away from people that love you, that's shame. And then the shame has begun. Look what happens next. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had. What? All he had? Wait a minute. Where did he get all this stuff? Was it his? He just got it from his dad, right? I think this is amazing. This is a story about us, by the way, right? Have you ever thought about all that you have? Think again, right? All you have is what has been given to you. Isn't that interesting? Okay? So he gathered all the stuff that he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. And did he do that for a short amount of time? No, he kept going. He kept going. He kept going. And after he'd spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So, remember, shame is a painful feeling or experience. Therefore, shame requires numbing. So the son starts by disconnecting from someone who loves him, moves away from connection, and then has to numb that pain of being disconnected. And we can numb that in all kinds of wild ways, right? We can use drugs, we can use deception, we can use shutting down, avoiding, right? We can do all kinds of things to attempt to not feel the effects of shame. Moving on. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country. Now, where was this country? A distant land. So he's in a different society, different culture, different values, right? And Jesus, just to really create the effect, he's talking to a Jewish audience. And what does this young man do who just told his Jewish dad to drop dead? He sent him to his fields to feed pigs. So you have to think about this. Jesus is getting his audience charged. I mean, how low can this kid go? I mean, it's bad enough what he did to his dad. It's bad enough what he did with all that money, with all the stuff that that the Father gave him. But then on top of that, now he's working with pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. Shame distorts your God-given identity. Guilt moves you toward your God-given identity. And it's really important to emphasize, guilt doesn't restore you, but it moves you toward restoration. Okay? Just because you feel guilty doesn't necessarily mean you've repented yet. Doesn't necessarily mean you've learned all the things that you need to learn. But it gets you started, and it's the opposite of shame. If you think about maybe some of the most shameful sins that were a part of your life, if you really think about those moments or those things, they were so horrible because they went against who you believe you really are. I know that happened for me for a long time. Like, I couldn't believe I did that. I said I would never do that to another human being. I did. You see, we go against our own sense of our identity. Okay, look what happens. So when he came to his senses, some translations say when he came back to himself, okay, came back to his real identity, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father." Shame humiliates. Guilt motivates. And this is the moment in the story where now we're starting to go from shame to guilt. Now, what would shame have said in this moment of the story?
You're not worthy to go back.
Excuse me, but do you know what you did? Do you realize how badly you've messed up? Do you realize what a horrible son you are?
It also tell you that there's no way you're going to be accepted by.
Exactly. Don't go back. You're done, man. There's no hope for you. How can anyone love you after what you've done? You see, I've said this to our congregation. I believe shame is the devil's love language. It is how he loves to communicate with us. He wants you to think so hopelessly that you stay exactly where you are, stuck. Okay? But that's where guilt is such a beautiful, yet uncomfortable gift. Because what did the son decide to do here? He says, yeah, I messed up. I did wrong, but you know what? I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back to my father. Okay, now think about what happens next. Shame blocks learning and growth. Guilt begins learning and growth. Shame says, are you kidding? What's the point? We're done here. God's done with you. Your family's done with you. Your marriage is done with you. But guilt can actually begin that learning process. It can be that really helpful, uncomfortable nudge toward some different options, some different ways of thinking about those things in your life. So look what he says next. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. So he got up, and went to his father. So, what do you think? Shame or guilt? Guilt. See, this is the incredible Christian message. Right? We are guilty, right? There should be consequences. But this is what's the amazing thing about Jesus, right? Is he said, yeah, you're guilty, but I don't want you to feel shame. Now, everything that we've done that is wrong had a consequence. But who paid the price for those consequences? Jesus. That's what's amazing about our faith. Shame keeps you stuck. Guilt makes you walk. And so now we're sort of going full circle with what we started with earlier today, right? In this story, we actually see metanoia, right? The changing of one's mind or purpose. So his purpose in the beginning, to go away from connection with who loved him. Now, changing his mind, changing his purpose, he is going toward that loves him and going back to his real identity. Godly sorrow brings repentance that leads to salvation, leaves no regret, but worldly sorrow brings death. And clearly this younger son was choosing salvation, restoration. Okay, now it gets very interesting. Now we learn a lot about God. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. And then the son stopped and said, "Oh, this is awesome. I am forgiven. I'm not getting a lecture. I'm off the hook. I'm just going to be really quiet and just let the Father just love me. Oh, I'm so grateful for God's love. I'm so grateful that I'm forgiven." No. He stayed with guilt. He stayed with responsibility. See, this is where religion stops right here at this verse. Religion says, okay, stop. We don't have to talk about those things that are shaming or embarrassing. No. God loves you. It's all good, guys. It's fine. Don't worry. Don't feel uncomfortable. We don't want you to feel shame, and we don't want you to feel guilt. But that's not what happened here. The son said to him, "Okay, Dad, thanks for the hug. Thanks for the kiss. But now I need to speak. I need to take responsibility." And he says, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son." Is he right? He is. And we have to just accept that. We have to accept the guilt that, yes, based on what I did, I'm not worthy of being in this family. But because of what Jesus did, I can feel guilt, but I don't have to feel shame. And I can move back and be connected with that who loves me. Shame says, I am bad. Guilt says, I did something bad. And then the story begins to wrap up here. But the father said to his servants, "Quick! Bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate." And here's where the father validates what the son just said. See, the father didn't just say, "Oh, no, it's no big deal. No, it's all right, it's all right." No, he says, "Yeah, my son was dead, and is alive again. No, he was lost. But now he's found. See, the Father didn't dismiss the guilt, but he completely annihilated any hint of shame. Right? Yes, you are flawed, right? But you are still incredibly worthy of acceptance and belonging. And therefore, we are going to have a party. And now we celebrate. See, in religion, we want the celebration earlier. In fact, I want that celebration without shame and without guilt. I just want the celebration. And that's very, very dangerous. Because then we miss the gift of guilt, which allows us to grow, allows us to change, allows us to become the people that we've always wanted to be. But shame said, give up. Shame said, don't even think about it. So, the answer here, the antidote as well to shame, we're going to talk about this a little bit tomorrow during service, but empathy. To feel with someone. This is one of the verses that I thought Christians never ever did. It was so interesting. I thought, I couldn't believe that's written in the Bible, because we don't do that very often in the church. Rejoice with those who rejoice. And what are we supposed to do with those who mourn? Well, give them some advice. Come on, man. It'll be better. Say something nice to them. Let's just perk it up a little bit, because, come on, who wants to mourn? There's something beautiful in mourning. The best relationships in my life are the people I have cried with. And they cried with me. Best relationships. Okay. Here's the clincher for today. Healing is not the absence of pain, but the presence of God. From a book that I stole from. Actually, it's from a book that I'm going to recommend at the end. I've got the slide up here with the book, so that was so funny. Doggone it, I wanted to feel so smart there for a couple of minutes. Who wrote that? Not me. Okay. Anyway, so healing is not the absence of pain, but the presence of God. See, this is so critical, because we think, well, healing means I should be feeling better, right? But we saw in the story that when that son started disconnecting from those who loved him, he kept chasing healing. He kept chasing anything to feel better. But none of those things worked. The only thing that worked, the only thing that will ever work, is the presence of God. Question: is the presence of God enough? Or do we want something more? Well, I'm a little tired of this pain in my life. Okay, all right. God, if you get all the pain out of my life, then I'm in. No. See, that's not following Jesus. Now, I'm not saying that we live in pain and misery all the time, but again, it's kind of like we were having that conversation earlier about boredom. We refuse to be bored. We have the same attitude sometimes toward suffering, toward pain. Right? And I'm not interested in the presence of God. I want some pain relief, man. That's what we can do. But the presence of God has to be enough. Let me share one quick example about this whole presence of God thing. My daughter just got her driver's permit a few weeks ago. Pray for me. Okay? It's kind of a nervous time, right? Because now she wants to practice a lot. It's LA traffic. It's kind of crazy, right? But she's determined, man. She wants to learn. So, I'm driving with her the other day. I'm in the passenger seat, right? She's got the wheel. And she learned this very interesting trick in her driver's ed course. Everything that she thinks or sees, she says out loud. Okay? So she's got her hands on the wheel, and she's saying, okay, I've got lots of space between myself and the car in front of me. Oh, that car is slowing down, so now I'm going to slow down. There's some people walking on the side of the street there, so I'm going to go a little bit to the left just in case they decide to jump in the street. I'm following the speed limit. I'm going 30 miles an hour. Oh, I just went 32. I'm going to slow down. Everything that she's seeing, doing, and thinking is coming out of her mouth. And it's awesome. Because guess how much is coming out of my mouth? Nothing. I'm just, hey, she just called it. She just said it. Now, every once in a while, she misses something. I'll add a little bit. But I am simply present. And I told her this. Got home later. I said, Stina, you just taught me a powerful lesson. What you were doing, I believe, is a beautiful example of what walking in the presence of God should be about. Isn't that interesting? It's not the 15 minutes in the morning. It's not, the 15 minutes of reading the Word. It's my life. It's everything. Connecting, walking, talking, thinking, thanking my Father all the time. Now, what kind of driver do you think my daughter is going to be? Probably pretty good, right? She's dealing with things. She's talking and thinking about this issue all the time and letting it come out. What would our lives be like if we were walking in the presence of God all the time? Even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's painful, the presence of God being enough and living in it. What a life. To me, that is the fathering that God wants to give every single one of us. And by the way, as I do that, I believe it protects me from the painful feeling or experience of believing that I'm flawed and unworthy of acceptance and belonging. You want shame resilience? Walk in the presence of God. See, before I became a Christian, my idea of God was this guy. He's distant, he's disappointed, I've done him wrong. But Rembrandt got it right. This is God. He wants complete connection with us. He does not want us dealing with shame. He wants us dealing with guilt, but understand you are always worthy of connection. Always worthy of belonging. That's why I want you to stay connected with me. Okay, our shame-guilt review. What is the biggest surprise in learning the difference between shame and guilt? Because those two things might have been fuzzy before today's class. And I hope this made a big distinction there. And then I also want you to just think about what are some healthy or novel ways you can practice the presence of God. And I want you to get ridiculously silly with this. Okay, whether it's washing dishes, driving your car, how you wake up in the morning, how you go to bed at night. My wife and I just made a covenant about a month ago. We decided that in our bedroom, it is going to be a holy temple with only each other and God. So no more Netflix and no more snacks in our bed. It's hard, people. It's hard. Okay? It's very uncomfortable. But no, kidding. But it's interesting. I mean, we're just catching like, wow, there's just so many little areas where me and you and God just ain't enough. But it should be. You know? So we got all that stuff out, and guess what we do in our bedroom now? Well, we sleep, we talk, and we do some other things every once in a while. It's amazing. So, I mean, this is where we've got to get the presence of God. Everywhere. Okay? Okay, now you asked me where that quote came from, so now I'm going to turn myself in. Alright, here we go. Here are two of probably the most incredible books that I've read in just the last 6 months. Switch on Your Brain by Dr. Carolyn Leaf. And she takes it to some really deep levels. Really deep levels. And she also, at the end of her book, has a 21-day brain detox plan that is incredible. I highly recommend attempting that. It's very, very good. And then this other one is called Joyful Journey, Listening to Emmanuel. And this is where I got the quote from. And also, last night we were talking about interactive gratitude. Remember when you say thank you? To imagine God's response to your gratitude. That's what this whole booklet is. It's actually a booklet. It's only like $8 or $9, but it is. Every page I was just reading, like I can't. This is a whole different prayer life than I've ever imagined in my life. It's incredible. Really, really helpful resource. Okay. What's that? It's 4 people, but if you get the main title and the subtitle, you will find it. One of them is James Wilder. But yeah, I picked that one up on Amazon. I think it's a digital book. Okay, so guess what? We're done. Give yourselves a hand. You were great. All right. So we're wrapping up a little earlier than planned, but I'm totally game for staying around for a few more minutes for some questions about anything from the day or things that came up throughout the day. Any thoughts or questions? Yes.
On the topic of literature, are there any books that you recommend for faith and repentance and peace?
Well, it's not specifically on repentance. Well, it is on the renewing of the mind a little bit, or changing the mind. The book I mentioned, I think last year, The 4-8 Principle by Tommy Newberry is a great one, because it really helps you understand the difference between healthy thinking and unhealthy thinking. And he has another book, a follow-up to that we did as a church. Our whole ministry went through this book together. It's called The 40 Days of Joy, Living Out the 4-8 Principle Life. Tommy Newberry is the author. But that one has, it's a 40-day book, and it's every chapter is like a very short devotional, followed by a very, very specific exercise that you do to sort of rewire and think in different ways. I like that one a lot just because it has so many practicals. I mean, I've taken dozens of examples from that book and applied it to discipling times, or when I'm trying to help people get to a trigger or a core belief related to a sin or any kind of issue. Many of those exercises in that book were very, very applicable, in terms of types of things to ask yourself and write out. Really, really helpful. The 40 Days of Joy by Tommy Newberry. It's 2 books. The first one was called The 4-8 Principle, but his follow-up was sort of it's kind of a workbook that follows the same principles.
Yeah. Okay. The parable that you used, which was the
Yes.
Is that, would you use that to restore someone to the fellowship generally? Is that what you would use in your church to restore someone to the fellowship if they've left the church?
I mean, I would use it. I don't think we have a specific, study or whatnot. I mean, I think when people come back, it often depends on what those key issues were that got them out of the church. That would highly influence on what we exactly studied. Our ministry actually just last year, one of the other ministers and I, we just developed a new study series that's it's story themed. Our mission statement is helping people find their place in God's story. So it's sort of like a new kind of edition of First Principles, but going through the whole, sort of the storyline of a person's life. And so what we do sometimes with restorations is actually kind of go through that story series with them, and that way we sort of cover all the basics, whether it's their walk with God, or was it a particular sin, or was it issues of the Bible that was going on, what was the key issue that led to your walking away. So we kind of go through a study series of restoration, but obviously this story is perfect. Other questions?
Yes. And just if the other book with the theologian that did the lecture.
Nguy. N-G-U-Y-E-N, I think. It's called the Return of the Prodigal Son is the name of the book. And I know his first name is Henry. And how to spell win with an N or an H, I don't know. It was spelled kind of that way. But he was a Catholic theologian, I believe, last century. Scott?
You just touched earlier on people with depression and some of the ways that they can help to get their dopamine levels high.
Right.
What would some of those be?
Okay, here's the most remarkable one that I've used with every client I've ever discussed depression with. And actually, this is from my guy, Martin Seligman. He did this about 30 years ago. It was originally called the 3 Blessings, but now it's called the 3 Good Things exercise. And they did this experiment where they found, I believe it was about 70 people that were diagnosed with major to moderate depression. Okay? But the qualifier was you had to have a diagnosis of moderate or major depression, severe depression, but you could not be on medications. So that to me, just even finding that group of people was very, I think, daunting, because typically if you have severe depression, you kind of need to be on some medication, at least temporarily, so that you're not at risk, because suicide is very high with severe depression. But whatever, they recruited all these people, and they asked them the following thing: we want you to be a part of an experiment for 14 days, but during those 14 days, we want you to sign in to our website. Okay? So they never had to leave their home. If they were depressed in bed all day, they could still participate in this thing. So what they did was they logged in every day, and all they had to do was write in 3 things that went well that day. And it didn't matter what it was. If it was, you picked up the newspaper today and brought it in the house. Good enough, man. Write it down. And they would write down these 3 good things that happened, and then one reflective question about why or how did that good thing take place. And so they'd have to explain it a little bit. So they did that for 14 days, and then they reevaluated all the participants. 87% of those participants went down 1 level in their depression. So in other words, the severe went to moderate, and the moderate went to mild, without a single drop of medication. Now, I'm not sharing that story because I'm against medication. I think sometimes medication is very appropriate and very necessary or just safe at times. I don't necessarily agree that it's always a long-term solution. However, the power of that story, that research, was that when you kind of intentionally decide to think in different ways, it naturally releases chemical reactions in your brain that actually help it function better. And that is exactly what happened. They were just doing the right types of exercises, the right type of thinking, that was getting that chemical effect for 14 days in a row, and people got better. And what I've noticed a lot with my clients is they'll do that, and then it ends up becoming a habit. Well, a habit like that is going to take care of you for a very, very, very long time. If you have already kind of gotten to that practice of intentional gratitude every day. By the way, that one's also a great example for family devotionals. What are 3 good things that went well this week? And why? Or how did that take place? Because generally you'll start finding very interesting qualities about yourself, that contributed to that good thing happening. So it sounds like in that example, you took initiative to talk with that guy, and that's why you had a great talk. There you go. So it's very validating as well. So it's called the 3 good things, or the 3 good blessings, or 3 blessings. Okay. You guys almost done? Is the boredom working right now? Saying, Dave, I think we're ready to move on. This is great. So tomorrow at service, the main message is actually going to be about this issue of shame again. So tomorrow is going to be also kind of a concluding thought about how to address shame and understand it better. So thank you guys very, very much. Thank you very much.